Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Set Lusting Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson. Today, it's two Jessies and a Bella. I am thrilled. First off, to have Bella Porra back on the podcast. Anytime I have Bella joining me, it feels like it's a celebration. Bella, how are you?
I'm doing wonderful, Jesse. It's so good to be back.
I am doing wonderful too, as long as I don't think about the current state of the world.
Yeah, personally and professionally, things are going great. And then I open the New York Times and things are going terribly.
We could do a whole hour of just bitching about how the world seems to be going effing insane.
So
But
bad, but
we
we won't.
but we won't. But last year on and I'm drawing a blank on Sean's website, but there was an article about a new Springsteen podcast. The Boss Belongs to Us. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm always interested in a new member of the neighborhood. And I started listening to it and fell in love with Jesse and Holly and their journey of finding out, and I'm not going to say anything more, but their Bruce journey. So I reached out to both of them. We've had just back and forth, but half of the dynamic duo. And I would argue the one with the best name, Jesse, has joined us. Welcome to the podcast, Jesse.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
So tell us a little about yourself.
Hi, I'm Jessie. I am a radio producer. That's my main job. And I also do bits and bobs of youth work and community facilitation. And I live and I'm from London in the UK for my sins. I also perform drag as Butch Springsteen, the trans younger brother of Bruce Springsteen. Actually, that's not quite true. I changed my kind of who I am in each act, but I quite like to just pretend that Bruce Springsteen doesn't exist and take on all of Bruce Springsteen's things as Butch. So for the Trans Day of Visibility a couple of years ago, like for Trans Pride, I did a post being like, hey everyone, just bring back my song that I wrote for all the trans masses out there, dancing in the dark, things like that. Anyway, so that's me.
Yeah, I wish I could remember where I read this, but multiple years ago for April Fool's Day, some journalist wrote an article that was set in a universe where Bruce did not become a musician, but became a writer. And the article had every one of his albums, but as a book. And they talked about this was a collection of short stories he did. This was his Pulitzer Prize winning historical novel. And I said, I would love to live in that alternate universe to read those books. So that sounds wonderful.
And as Jesse Jackson knows, I love to look at Bruce Springsteen songs and be like, how could this possibly be gay or queer or trans? And Dancing in the Dark is such a good trans anthem.
It is. It's too simple almost. I want to change my clothes, my hair, my face.
There's no other logical explanation.
And then also, this is something like Holly talks about a lot, is the other line in that song, if there's something happening somewhere, baby, I just know that there is, which is like every closeted queer person's experience of wanting connection and community and not knowing how to get it.
Yeah, I'll urge everyone to go back in the archives. Bella joined me and we did an episode of Bruce's gayest songs. She had a theory that Western Stars was filled with nothing but stories of gay love songs.
Love.
Once you look at it with that lens, end to end life.
Yeah, me and Holly had a lot of conversations about Western Stars because I really am a big country music fan. And when that album came out, if one of the main tenets of country music is storytelling, I think there's an argument to be made that all of Bruce's music is country music, because he builds these beautiful worlds and these characters in this kind of like way that reminds me of lots of country songs that I love. Western Stars, country pop. I was just like, slay bitch. Getting older, he's playing around, he's like doing that music video where he's walking down the road in his like jacket.
In his butch lesbian look.
In his butch lesbian era.
He does. I remember reading when he had is it the Navy jacket? I'm trying to think the right name for it. But when he did right before like Biden's inaugural afterwards, he did a song and they're like, Bruce does rock some great jackets. Has a great. A couple years ago, I got a blue jean jacket for Christmas, and I did quote. I did a couple. I did the picture of Bruce and his is what I think I look like, and then I show like Chris Farley jacket is what I probably look like. But yeah, I just think it is hilarious, and we'll get into this more. But I when I first had Bella as a guest, she shared that Streets of Philadelphia is how she found Bruce. And I brought that up a couple of times on the podcast that you never know what song is going to get somebody into that fandom. And so it's amazing. So I'm going to go to that. Jesse, let's talk about growing up first. Where did you grow up and what kind of music was your family listening to?
I grew up in London, in the UK, and we were definitely like a both my parents were super into music. I did a lot of listening to Steely Dan as like a younger person, which did not make me cool at school. I was very into them. I also played saxophone, like Clarence Clements, so I was like into kind of jazz and that kind of thing. And then through my mum, like I think many women of her age, she's in her 70s, was extremely into Bob Dylan. So I did a lot of listening to him. Yeah, so that kind of music.
Did you embrace your parents' music or did you just tolerate it and then later age liked it?
No, I was quite like, I loved it. Yeah, from quite a young age. I think I am just an old man, a
Okay.
young man's skin. And have been since I was really younger. I also had a really big Lynyrd Skynyrd phase.
Okay.
And I did not know the cultural context of, I learned later about all of the kind of terrible things that they symbolize, including
Yeah.
having the Confederate flag on some of their albums. So that was not what I was into.
Yeah.
But I, for some reason, was like, yeah, very into the sound of their music. When I was like 11 or 12, I found some kind of like Lynyrd Skynyrd compilation CD in like a charity shop.
I graduated high school in 77. So I grew up with Barry Manilow and Casey and the Sunshine Band and all this 70s pop AM radio. I have this love of what I think a lot of people might go, oh, really? That? But it was like, it was important to me and it made me change. I also thought of a few years ago, Brad Paisley had a song and he talked about,
Oh.
yeah, yeah. I just liked Leonard Skinner. I didn't know what this meant.
That song was so nuts. And I remember Stephen Colbert did like a joke song called Whoops-a-Daisy Homophobe. That was like a take on Brad Paisley's Accidental Racist. That is very funny if you can still find it online.
Can you remember when you'd first discovered Bruce and what about his music spoke to you?
Yes, so he's obviously just like a super famous guy. I had heard of him. He's a name that gets through. I knew who Bruce Springsteen was, or I thought I knew who Bruce Springsteen was from when I was young. But I had the kind of idea of him that I think a lot of people do, where I was just like, American flag, like rock musician, probably sounds like Bon Jovi, like not my cup of tea, not for me. So I was not a Springsteen fan like when I was a teenager or anything. I lived in Canada for a year when I was 21 and had a friend who lived in Chicago. I went to visit him and he was a Springsteen fan, big Springsteen fan. And so we just spent a week together doing lots of hanging out and listening to music. And so Bruce was just on. And there was one night where we made a spaghetti carbonara and we're just like dancing around, having a really fun time. And he was playing me The Promise, which is that album from 2010 that's a bunch of like unreleased songs from earlier years. And we listened to the song Ain't Good Enough For You, which is this actually like cheeky, silly song about having a girlfriend who cannot be pleased, and he like tries all the things, and he's I learned the latest moves, and I like read from the Book of Love and bought a new shirt.
It's one of my favorite songs of his.
I love that song.
Such a good song.
It's a great song. Yeah, you're like, how did that not get released? But go, yeah.
Yeah, it's And also he's so fit, and that era of Bruce Springsteen, like he is gorgeous. Anyway, yeah, so I was like super into that song, and I had a bit of a classic kind of. I also came out as queer in my 20s, so I was like just starting to tentatively dip my toe in, thinking like unrepressing all of the things that I'd done and hide myself from myself. And so I knew I really liked that song, and it spoke to me in a certain way, and I didn't really know exactly how. And then I moved back to Glasgow in Scotland, which is where I lived for a long time. And I just had this kind of autumn winter phase of walking around in the rain, listening to endless Bruce Springsteen, feeling like he was the only person who understood me. And that was very like Darkest on the Edge of Town vibes as well. And yeah, and then he never left me. I just like really loved him. And ultimately, for the first couple of years of being a fan, it was a lot of I love him, and I'm not exactly ready to know to let myself think about exactly why, if that makes sense. And I actually did a lot of bonding with my straight male friends. Those are the people that I like talked about Bruce with and got nerdy about Bruce with. And then one of those straight male friends of mine bought me this zine called But Springsteen, which is by this queer person from London, CJ Ray, or Black Lodge Press, where they draw all of the different eras of Bruce Springsteen's butt and talk about fancying Bruce Springsteen. It's this queer nice zine. What? And then he accompanied me through that. And now I'm a trans masculine person. I'm like transitioning now. Thank you. And then so now I realized that a lot of what I liked about Bruce Springsteen was his very specific relationship to masculinity, and that a lot of his songs do tease out the emotions like that I felt as a queer person. And so Ain't Good Enough For You is like a really good example of that, where in retrospect I can look back at it and be like, that's the kind of, at least my experience of working out that I was trans was I was like, I must try and be a woman in every single way possible, just in case. And like every way I tried to do that wasn't good enough because I'm not a woman.
Yeah.
Feel like it still doesn't feel right. Maybe I should go high femme and see how that works.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Every single like way. And so that song still has like a really special place in my heart for that reason.
Not bad.
Yeah, that's a great story. I just saw this, and it once again, I'm late to the dance sometimes, but I saw someone post, you don't wake up and decide I'm right-handed or left-handed, you just are. And you just, they try to make you write with your right hand, which by the way, my wife had to, the nuns made her, so she does everything else left-handed, but she writes right-handed. It just doesn't feel right. And you would think something that basic, we'll get off just for a few minutes politically. That's my biggest frustration, Jesse and Bella, is that so many people can't even acknowledge that there might be a different viewpoint than theirs. That white male growing up in the 60s and 70s will have a different perspective than an African American citizen or a queer or a Latino or whatever other perspective growing up in a different era. And it just seems basic that you should understand it. I don't know it, I can't understand it, but I can at least acknowledge it's got to be different than mine.
Yeah. It's also just, I think you're totally right in that I actually don't need people to understand me, to be honest. I need people to respect me and leave me alone and all my friends alone and my community.
Well, that's what I don't get is, I was talking to a friend about this just this morning. I don't understand why people care.
Yeah.
No one's saying you have to do anything with your gender. You can just keep the gender you got assigned. You can keep the factory default settings. Why do you care if other people want to change it? We have the technology.
Also,
I really don't get it.
So people are much more obsessed with gender than trans people are saying that.
It's so true.
I'm also just sorry, we can move on from this, but just to say, just because you said about left-handed things, I was chatting to a friend who used another metaphor around like being left and right-handed, which is we obviously are in this kind of like real moral panic around transness and queerness. In the UK and the US and in other parts of the world. One of the kind of like threads of that moral panic is people talking around transness is this like new scary fad where we're like infecting people and more people are coming out because they're being coerced at school, we're turning kids trans and all of this stuff. Another graph which is useful, that my friend pointed me towards, is this thing around like the number of left-handed people grew exponentially as soon as it became like, the less stigmatized it was to be left-handed, the more left-handed people there were. And that's not to say we don't think that there were only right-handed people before it was unstigmatized to be left-handed. And that's the same. It's not that there's like suddenly millions more trans people, but the point is that aside from this kind of negative turn that we've seen since 2016, it is ultimately safer to come out as trans than it was before, or has been safe to come out as trans than it was before. So that's why there have been more and more trans people coming out.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that there's suddenly more, do you see what I mean?
Left-handed thing, it's not like then there were 20% of people who were left-handed, then there were 30. It leveled out at about 10% because that's about how many left-handed people there are. And I don't know what the percentage is of trans people, but I have to imagine similar leveling out of people being like, okay, now there's just a certain portion of the population who are trans.
The issue, and then we'll move on back to music, I promise, listeners. But I remember, and I will pick on my poor brother who died a few years ago, but he was angry about this they, them pronouns. And I could not make him understand. But he was born Grover. My mom named him Grover, Grover, Dean Jackson. The moment he was old enough, he went by Dean. Because who would want to go by the name Grover? It was my great grandfather's name. My great grandmother asked my mom to do it. She did. He said I was called a rover and a dog all my life. So he chose to go by Dean. And so I was like, yes.
That he wanted his teachers to respect.
Do you not see? There could not be a more literal example in your face, Dean. And he just, what the F, Dean? He later did understand. And yes, bless him. I lost him 2 years ago and I miss him all the time. But yes, it was hilarious that it was just so specific. So I think this is a good point, Jesse. You're talking about your journey and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what I feel like, and I'm overgeneralizing, is, okay, I can talk about Bruce to my straight friends, but I need to fill in the blanks, Cyndi Lauper, Barbara Streisand, whatever, my outdated white guy's perception with my queer friends. But you decided that there was this path. And is that what led to the podcast?
Yeah, so it was really a zine-based journey, I would say, in that I was given this zine, But Springsteen, which was written by a queer person doing a kind of like queer interpretation of Bruce Springsteen. And then I was like, wow, this is amazing. And then I started talking to my queer friends about Bruce and this zine, and it turned out loads of them were like, yeah, queer people like Bruce Springsteen. I didn't know. And then I was given one of Holly's zines, who ended up being the co-host of Because the Bus Belongs to Us, our podcast. So I was originally a fan of Holly Cascio because I was reading their zines and being like, oh my God, this is so well done and I am so inspired by this and it's so cool. Because Holly writes a lot about their identity and how it relates to Bruce Springsteen, and it's like these semi-autobiographical zines also around their love of Bruce. They're so good. And then I discovered Because the Boss Belongs to Us, which is a zine made by someone called Alana Kumbier, which is a series of essays by queer femmes all about Bruce Springsteen and their relationship to Bruce Springsteen. It's really good. That came out in 2011. So credit to Alana Kumbier for the name. Anyway, so I was really on this like journey. I was like, whoa, cool. I got in touch with Holly and was like, hey man, let's hang out. We have so much in common. Would you maybe want to do a kind of project with me? And that's how those conversations started. And that's how me and Holly got to know each other. And that was, I think, originally in 2020 that I first got in touch with Holly, and we just chatted, and it was the pandemic, so we chatted on Zoom and just kept in touch. No one really wants to commission a series about the queer interpretation of Bruce Springsteen. That's my job. I make radio documentaries.
Okay.
I tried to get it made for years. I pitched it to the BBC, pitched it to Spotify, pitched it to lots and lots of people in the UK and in America. In the summer of 2022, I went to the US for a month and visited lots of different friends that I hadn't seen for years. And then I had a couple of solo days in New York. I didn't know anyone. And I was put in touch with someone because she was a queer radio person. So someone was like, you guys should hang out. You've got two things in common, kind of vibe. And it was correct. We had things in common. It was nice. She's called Jasmine JT Green. And we were just like shooting the shit. And I was telling her about how I really wanted to make this Bruce Springsteen podcast. And she was like, oh, do you know that I run a production company? You should pitch it to me. So then I did pitch it to her. She pitched it to iHeart, who was our distributor. And that's how we ultimately got the money to make the series, which is really cool. And we made it a year after that. We finished in July 2024. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Wait, so this, Jesse, if you don't mind, this
Yeah.
leads me to one of my
Sure.
little soapboxes. And Jesse L., I would love to hear your take on it. So I also am beating the drum that like Bruce Springsteen has a lot of queer fans. Like even before the podcast, I was like, Bruce is a queer icon. Like his music is queer, blah, blah, blah. And I would weirdly get a lot of pushback on that. And not from straight people, although sometimes straight people will be like, that's not what it means. Like you're reading too much into it. Fair, guilty as charged. I would sometimes get pushback from queer people, and not to generalize, but often cisgender gay men who would be like, Bruce is not a queer icon. It's not like he's got this huge group of queer fans. But clearly, that's not true. And my suspicion is that because the people who resonate with Bruce's music are frequently lesbians, transmasculine people, transgender men, like groups that don't necessarily have the same cultural footprint in the community. I'm curious if you think that's one of the reasons it's harder to sell this idea of Bruce as a queer icon.
And
Yeah,
if you could, before you answer that, because my question is almost parallel to that. Is the reason what Bella just brought up, is that one of the reasons why? Because I was curious why you decided to use the format of almost I'm doing a doctoral thesis that I'm trying to prove. So I didn't know, and maybe they're not the same different questions, but I feel like they're similar. And so if you could, Jesse, if you can, why did you decide to do it in that theory? And is part of it because of Bella's thoughts?
For people who haven't listened to Because the Bus Belongs to Us, it's a series where Holly and I are on a mission to get Bruce Springsteen recognized as a queer icon. So that's the vibe of the show, is we come up with, we're like, we both love Bruce Springsteen. We know that other queer people love him too. Why is he not in this canon of Madonna, Celine Dion, Diana Ross, etc.? And then we come up with a checklist of things he would need to be in order to be recognized as a queer icon.
Those, if you don't mind.
Okay. Thank you.
Queer icons need to be camp, and that's a kind of like larger than life. You would maybe dress up as them at a party. It's more than so some of that is around aesthetics, but it's also about a vibe, a way of being, a kind of truth telling. Camp is this really funny thing where I think it's with queer people, if you say camp, we all know what it means, but it's actually quite hard to define in a sentence. And so it's about that like slightly unknowable energy that we all recognize. So that's number one. The other is that queer icons need to be able to be rooted for as an underdog, even if they are not an underdog themselves. Like you need to be able to see queer people who have experienced hardship, need to be able to read a hardship in the queer icon so that they relate to them on that level. The music, if they are a musician, their music needs to, wow, sorry, it's actually been a little while since I've said these out loud. The music
I remember this one because
access...
I thought this one really moved me. It needs to help queer people connect to emotions that they repressed when they were hiding themselves.
Yeah, the phrase that we use is drag them back from years of dissociation. We are well practiced as queer people at hiding ourselves from ourselves for lots of reasons, because because we are socialized to do so, because our identities are often stigmatized. So yeah, it's music that like drags the emotions back out of you that you've been dissociating from, basically. And we subcategorize that.
Yes, you are. Yes.
You need to be able to cry, dance, and fuck to Bruce Springsteen's music in order for that checklist item. And then the last one was just a simple one of basically queer people. There needs to be a general consensus from queer people, and so the last checklist point is that other queer people who are not fans of his music, because you can be a fan of a musician and not think they're a queer icon. So it was like people who might like him but don't already think he's a queer icon. We needed to be able to convince them that he was. So that's what the podcast is. It was this weird underground thing where like the more people I spoke to, it almost felt like the secret society of people behind closed doors being like, yeah, I really like Bruce Springsteen. And you're right, I definitely think part of it, Bella, is that in, I guess, more mainstream queer clubs and nights, and also just like capital G gay, like at the Pride Parade, like in these kind of more mainstream, sometimes more capitalist spaces, there is a certain white cis gay men have a slightly bigger monopoly over like that part of the culture and the cultural output. And we talk about that a bit in the podcast as well, because it's also interesting that it can feel icky sometimes trying to work through these threads of like why we love people and why we put them on pedestals. And it is really common that like lots of white cis gay men really revere like black straight women who share maybe really different experiences to them. And it's not that you have to always exactly be the same as someone to relate to them, but it is a kind of interesting thing of like, where is the line between putting someone on a pedestal and like fetishizing their experience and things. So one of the things is that, yes, I think that lesbians, transmasculine people, dykes, butches have historically had less power over like the queer swaying of queer culture.
So if you don't mind if I interject, you reminded me of something else, which is sometimes I feel like as a lesbian being like, oh, I love this straight man. People are like, why don't you support lesbian musicians? And it's, I don't know, because sometimes the Indigo Girls don't hit the same way.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. I think exactly. No, I think that's the other big thing, right? Is that like he's a white, straight, cisgendered, now billionaire man. And I think rightly, some queer people are like, why? What are you giving? Like, why?
Yeah, I get
it. Great question.
And that's fair. He's not a grassroots musician. Should I be spending my pink pound on him? I don't know. So that was one of the questions to you.
Sure. I love that discussion, because I will get it that Bruce should not be talking about he sold his music to Sony for $500 million. He has more money than he'll ever be able to spend. How can he talk about poor people? And I make the argument that if you grew up poor, that never leaves you.
100%.
Yeah. There are things you do that you have to work against. The other thing is, that a song can mean different things to different people. And I know that seems so basic, but there was this a few years ago, it was a young man facing some disease, and he said Tougher Than the Rest was his favorite song. Tougher Than the Rest in a lot of ways is a love song, but that doesn't mean it can't be a song. When I had colon cancer a few years ago, the idea that some people might want to die young, man, young gloriously, get it right straight now, mister, that's not me. I want all the time that heaven will allow. That was I'm fighting cancer. I want all the time that heaven will allow. And so it is, once again, the closed-mindedness of some people. This song means this. Yes, but that song means this to you. But every morning when I wake up, I go, I'm tired and bored with myself. That's the first thing I think of when my alarm goes off. And which is not anything about it, is, as you guys were talking about, dancing in the dark. And I think that's part of the beauty of not just Bruce's music, but hey, let's fuck it. We're in a Bruce Springsteen podcast. That's the beauty of Bruce's music, is the wide palette he paints with those lyrics and songs.
So many people feel seen.
Yeah. So you got the green light from iHeartRadio, yay them. And how much I'm fascinated by, and I joked before we hit record that you're a professional, and you joked about, yeah, so are you, Jesse. I've done over 1,300 episodes. What I'm saying, though, is I have no rhyme or reason to mine. I find someone who I think would be an interesting conversation. We get on Zoom, we have a conversation, and then I hope they have fun. I hope my listener likes it. But you actually had to B, you were presenting a story and doing some building. So talk about how much of this was pre-planned, how much was this after the fact with editing? Talk to me a little bit of that, you could, Jesse.
Yeah, of course. A peek behind the veil, if you will.
Yes.
Yay.
It is mainly that it was all planned. So the structure of the series is we come up with this checklist, and then ultimately every episode from there is we're exploring one item on the checklist point. And then there are a couple of episodes along the way where we feel quite uncomfortable with some of what we're doing, which is related to what we already talked about, like why are we like idolizing this man who doesn't share our experience, and also who doesn't necessarily share our politics either. And then we like come back, and then the last episode is the last checkpoint, which is we're testing with a panel of queer people whether or not we can convince them that he's a queer icon. In order to get something like that commissioned, you have to write up like a pitching deck. So every episode, I chose the format of that before we started making it, and the series is almost exactly to the format that I wrote that it would be.
Fascinating.
And we already knew loads and loads of the people that we wanted to talk to for it as well, because we're both like in queer Bruce Springsteen fandom. So a lot of it was planned, but then it's this really interesting balance, and it's one of the reasons I really like being a radio producer. You can't actually plan for what people are going to say when you interview them. And so it's this really, you're walking this tightrope of being like, I've pitched this idea, this like commissioner is expecting this story, but I also want to maintain the flexibility of we will be discovering things along the way, and it's good to put the things in that you're discovering. So the kind of broad skeleton was planned, but depending on what people said, we did change the narrative, like change different things. And the one thing that was not planned at all was the last episode, which is where we have to present to the panel. So that is like properly real.
Yeah.
And like when they give their verdict is like when we heard their verdict as well.
Yeah, and I could tell that when I listened to it. How did you hear about the podcast?
So I'm in like the Pride group at my work, which is I work for a reproductive rights organization. So of course the Pride group, yes, I love it. It's wonderful. But of
Also,
course
so
the
much
Pride
historical
group,
solidarity between trans bodily autonomy activists and abortion rights activists.
so much. Yeah, of course the Pride is huge. The
And
whole or half the organization is gay or
so,
trans.
and Jesse, I do need to inject just a moment. Is I always love Bella because she will joke afterwards. Yeah, I got on a Bruce Springsteen podcast and ended up talking about the AIDS epidemic and how it was mishandled because I'm me. And
It comes up.
it just comes up. So yes, please.
Every conversation I have eventually gets back to abortion. It's just a matter of how long it's going to take. But we were doing stuff for Pride, and one of the things we did was we made like a playlist of all the songs people in the Pride erg suggested. And I suggested a Bruce Springsteen song because of course I did, because it's everyone at work knows I love Bruce Springsteen. And someone
song?
I put Born to Run. I put on Born to Run because it is my favorite song. But someone in the group was like, do we think we should have straight artists on the playlist? This is a Pride playlist. Should we have straight artists? But what annoyed me a little was he was like, of course we can make an exception for someone like Charlie XCX because gay men are huge fans of Charlie XCX. And I was like, okay, excuse me. But lesbians and trans masculine people are huge fans of Bruce Springsteen. So I sent Jesse, I'm sure you've seen the article, What If Bruce Springsteen Was My Butch Lesbian Mom?
Yes, Natalie Adler.
So I put that in the chat, and then later a coworker of mine was like, hey, I saw this podcast. It's literally perfect for you. It's all about being gay and a Bruce Springsteen fan. I was like, you're correct. It is perfect for me.
Oh my God, I love it. I don't want to rag on Charlie XCX too much.
No, she's great.
But it is interesting. Something I find interesting about Bruce Springsteen is I don't believe that Bruce Springsteen is chasing the pink pound. Like, I don't think that he is that aware. I don't know him. I don't know what he thinks. But I don't think he's super aware of, I don't think he's intentionally cultivating a queer audience, basically, as like someone, for example, like Taylor Swift is really outwardly. I do find that kind of interesting in this like legacy, like one of the ways that you end up with like straight icons that the queer community attaches themselves to is one of the reasons for that is historically because of things like the AIDS crisis and rampant homophobia and transphobia. It was before much rarer to have like out queer people in the public eye. And so there is this like older practice of queering where you're like, we don't have any elders or spokespeople or people to look up to, so we need to like imprint on someone and kind of make them fit, sugar them into the like books that we need them to be in.
Yeah.
And that's like a bit more, the kind of queer Springsteen fandom is a bit more from that legacy, rather than the kind of newer pop artists who are much more aware that the queer community now is like quite a lucrative community to tap into, basically.
But Harry Styles is queer baiting, like wearing the fashion that he wears. Like Bruce Springsteen was not kissing Clarence Clemens to bring gay people into his shows. He was just like, I think this would be fun, so I'm going to do it.
I think it's really important not to assume around like people's identities and things like that. I don't think that musicians should have to come out in order to, and I also, even if Harry Styles is not queer, I really support straight men to like play with their identities. Do you know what I mean? So it's not
such a good point. You're right. My apologies, but such a good point. Yeah.
And what I find, which once again shows my naiveness, is shouldn't a Pride playlist be inclusive? Right? Like, shouldn't I be like, wait a minute, we're celebrating diversity, so you want us not to be diverse in our music? We're collecting?
They were like, you're not allowed to restrict membership in the group just to queer and trans people. You have to admit everyone because of like the DEI panic. And we were like, yes, we're the LGBTQ group. We know that sometimes people join and they're like, oh, I'm actually straight though. And we're like, oh yeah, welcome.
Yeah.
That's fine. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it is.
That's the whole thing. That's the point of the gay straight alliance.
Yes, exactly.
Fine to have groups that are exclusive. I don't think that's
it was
like
more
discriminating against people.
Yeah.
Because I think there are reasons why people like to hang out with people who share identities with them sometimes.
Yeah, it's the DEI panic in the US now. People are very worried about having in-group spaces because they're worried they're going to get sued. So and we're very worried we're going to get sued about everything. So we get a lot of guidance from our general counsel who's, don't say this, don't say that.
Sending solidarity to everyone in the US.
Thank you so much.
Who's experiencing this.
Oh, so Jesse, you shared that you had done a lot of planning, but what surprised you as you got into the podcast and you recording and doing the research? If anything, what did surprise you?
That Holly and I felt quite strongly about. So we made it we started making it in October 2023 and we finished making it in July 2024. So we made it the same month as the most recent start of attack on Gaza from Israel, basically. Both me and Holly believe in Palestinian liberation, and so we were doing lots of stuff outside the podcast, organizing against Israel's genocide of the Palestinian people. And so we really had this, it felt really hard to be making a podcast that was so fun and silly, because even this kind of shtick that we were doing, which was like, yeah, we're on a serious mission and we're scientists and we want Springsteen to be like recognized as a queer icon, like that was a joke. Like the whole thing was a joke, and we didn't necessarily take it that seriously in our lives. And that became part of the podcast because the cognitive dissonance of that became too much for us, and we ended up making an episode kind of looking at that and looking at Bruce Springsteen's politics and what we know about them and what we don't know. But to answer your question of what surprised me, I think that I ended up being quite black and white about what was and wasn't political in my life. And something that was quite nice and came out of that is like, we need to build the world that we want to be in. We need to act according to the world that we want to build. And part of that is joy, and part of that is like community building and supporting each other and thinking about identity in these different ways. And so what was quite nice is I was reminded by CJ Ray, who wrote about Springsteen, and some other people that we spoke to, that isn't just silly what we're doing. And that's not the same as me being like, we did the most important hard-hitting political thing in the world. But it was kind of, I think I'd made this like real separation between like funny Bruce queer stuff and then like my actual activist organizing life and things like that. And actually there's more connections and it's important to have them. And part of keeping the movement alive also is like bringing people spaces of like joy and reflection. So that was like a nice surprising thing that happened, was that those two things connected a bit more in my life than I thought they were going to.
Yeah, I do too.
I You answered it, Jesse, but I am interested in, you were saying not being so black and white about what's political, what's not. Is that like you're taking joy from things that you're like, I wouldn't necessarily trust this person if I elected them. I don't necessarily want to hear this person's thoughts on how we should fix the world, but I can still enjoy is that kind of what you're saying in terms of like black and white political?
I think so. I think the fact that other queer people could listen to the podcast and find meaning from it feels impact and important to me. But what do we even know about Bruce? Is he even fun? Crucially, he didn't, like, for the whole production process, come out and say anything about Palestine, but also he's vocally supportive of the queer community, which is cool. But I don't know what he thinks about women. I don't know what he thinks about, he endorsed like Hillary Clinton one time. So I don't know what he's like as a man, as a person. But what I do know is the Bruce Springsteen in my brain is amazing. He's so cool and radical and writes these amazing queer songs. And it's this thing of being like, like, where does the artist end and the art begin? And also, I think there's something powerful in fandom, in fan culture, of it doesn't really matter who the person is, actually. The thing that you're doing is you're like projecting things onto them and you're making meaning out of them. And that is the creativity, is like the meaning that you're making. Yeah. Nothing to do with them, basically. And that was like where I came to with that.
That's very fascinating. I also wonder, and you might not have a strict answer for this, but I wonder how looking at the politics, the policy is different coming from the UK and like looking at American art. I feel like if a UK artist said something, I'd be like, I actually don't know if that shares my politics or not, because I'm not really sure what that means in the context of the UK.
Yeah, totally. Like, we have a really different relationship with like class here.
Interesting.
And I can't pretend to know that much about Bruce's context. Like, I've never been to... The biggest tragedy of the podcast, sorry, just to have my tiny violin moment, for the first time ever in my entire career, we had enough of a budget to fly me and Holly to New York, or to the States, so that we could go and record in New Jersey. So the original plan was that we were going to go and record in New Jersey. I flew out a couple of days before Holly for just like logistical reasons. I tested for COVID the day before I flew. I started feeling ill on the flight. I arrived to America. I slept for like 16 hours, woke up and I was like, I just definitely have COVID. I got a test, had COVID, isolated for 10 days, which was the entire time that I was there, and then flew home. I've still never been to New Jersey.
Oh no.
And that was my chance to go. So anyway, that's my little violin. But also, just to say that I've been to New Jersey, I don't have that many references for the culture that Bruce grew up in either.
That's interesting. And I do know, just from the little I know about the UK and the class there, it is so different than America and how we look at class, I think. So that's fascinating.
And we have a really big like socialist and unionist culture in the UK. And I know that those words mean quite different things in the US. So it's like politically as well, we definitely found that because obviously we made this for an American company. And we found as we were making it that we were using these words that we thought we shared references on, and actually we didn't. And we had to do quite a lot of clarifying in the team, where Holly and I would say something and think it was really obvious what we were saying, and actually it was being taken in a really different way. So
interesting.
What is it that two countries separated by common language?
Yeah.
Is someone's quote? Yeah. When you heard the podcast, and then I'll talk about what I did. But Bella, when you heard the podcast, what were your thoughts? I did this after the fact, so I got to binge them all in a row. I don't know if you had done the experience too, but what were your thoughts about this from a totally different perspective than mine would be?
It was just so refreshing to hear people talking about Bruce the way I think about Bruce, because I was not aware there was this like queer Bruce zine culture. So it was so nice to listen and be like, yes, exactly. This is what I'm talking about. This is what I mean. And not for nothing, I get very frustrated sometimes when people talk about camp, because I'm like, no, you're not thinking hard enough about it. Like, you're saying something is camp, but you're just saying that because it has bright colors. Like, bright colors don't make everything camp. So I was a little nervous with the camp episode. I was like, I wonder if this is going to annoy me. But I was like, no, they're thinking hard about camp. Like, they know what camp is and they know how to define. Like, it was, once I heard the camp episode, I was like, I'm going to this podcast because they are thinking about these things. Even if I don't agree with everything, although I did agree with your camp episode, I was like, they're thinking about them very clearly and they're putting a lot of thought behind it. So I know I'm going to like the conclusions that they draw, even if I don't always agree with like how they get there. But yes, I feel like so often people will be like, it's camp. And I'm like, no, if it's intending to be bad, it's not camp. Then it's just like satire. You have to love and be committed to what you're doing in order for it to reach camp status, in my opinion.
Yeah, totally.
You have to intend it to be good. And if you miss the mark, then it's camp.
Totally.
Exactly.
So when I heard about the podcast and I pulled it up and listened to it over a couple of days, I found myself, one, fascinated by this peek into a different culture. I've only watched the first season of Reservoir Dogs. The reason why that's interesting is it's a whole nother world that is totally different, yet very relatable to mine in different ways. And I found myself, because I want everyone in the world to listen to Bruce Springsteen's music. I don't have this, no, he's mine. I want John Hyatt to win every Grammy and do everything, even though a lot of people are like, no, he's our Jim, right? I've never had that feeling of, oh, I want to keep this person. I don't want them to go mainstream because that we're going to lose them. So my whole point was like, oh, please let him be. This would be the coolest thing ever in the world. And oh my gosh, Bella has to be listening to this podcast. So any thoughts on my feelings? And Jesse, tell me how the podcast ended up being the audience and how they felt about it.
Yeah, it was so gorgeous. It was so nice. And it's nice because it came from this kind of like DIY zine culture. And we really wanted to pay homage to that as well. So like the way it's edited and sound designed, we try to have this kind of DIY aesthetic. And what was so lovely about it is Holly and I both got messages from different queer Springsteen fans, but also people whose dads are Springsteen fans who are straight and who wanted to send it to their dad. And it was really nice and so lovely to have it out in the world and to have done our bit for the culture that had given so much to us to be able to give back in this way. And we joked the only reason we did it is so that we could like have fun chats with people. And it really works. Like we got to interview so many people that we love so much, like Alana Kumbie, who made that zine Because the Bus Belongs to Us. And so it felt like a really beautiful kind of like cyclical moment where we were like, yeah, interacting with the culture that had given us so much as well. And we kept an eye on Bruce, because obviously one of the kind of like interesting things about Bruce Springsteen, I guess in a similar way to someone like Dolly Parton, is that his music is specific and it has this broadness that it means that people with lots of different identities can relate to it in some way. And so Springsteen obviously does have like Republican fans, has fans who are really far away from us politically and our identities. And so we kept a little eye on some of the forums because we were like, oh, is there going to be any kind of pushback? Is someone going to be like, oh, it's a woke gone mad, like they're calling Springsteen gay kind of thing? From what we saw, everyone was like really nice and respectful. Like a couple of people on Reddit found it and posted in their forums being like, have you guys seen this like gay Springsteen podcast? But as far as we've seen, no one got annoyed with us, which is quite a feat, I think.
In this day and age.
Yeah, so Bella, how do they feel like they shared, I don't want to say spoke for you, but there was this feeling of, hey, yeah, I've been thinking this for a long time. It's nice to know that other people think the same thing.
Oh, I feel very well represented by the podcast. It's now everyone knows now if people are like, I don't know if we should have Bruce, what do you mean? He's not gay. And I'm like, no, he's not. But look at this. I feel very confident that I can point to the podcast and be like, just listen to this and you'll see what I mean. Yeah.
Any other thoughts about the podcast before I ask you a couple more Bruce questions, Jesse? And the same for you, Bella, if you have any questions for her.
I think people should, I'd love more people to listen and let us know what you think.
Okay.
Jesse, I have a question because you had said that the last episode was totally unplanned. You didn't know what people would say. Did you and Holly have a plan for what might happen if they were all like, no, he's not a queer icon?
Plan. Ultimately,
Not to spoil, I'm sorry, I spoiled the podcast for everyone who hasn't listened to it. You should still go listen to it because it's so good, but
yes,
it does not end with everyone saying, no, he's not a queer icon.
yeah,
Maybe
it
one
doesn't
person
end
does,
with like,
though. Ooh.
yeah, it does funny where they go, that would have been like, no, you haven't proved anything. Yeah.
I was anxious listening to the episode. I was like, what if they don't follow their great
Oh,
research?
I'm so
He's
glad
made
you.
such a good point.
I was the same way. How dare they not see that this, right?
No.
Because you've checked every mark.
Yeah, so I'm
Well,
curious if you thought about what might happen if everyone was like, no.
I think it's funny because that's so you guys, and I'm glad that the jeopardy came across that. But it's also funny because you say, Jesse, we checked every mark, but we did check every mark of a list that we made up ourselves.
Good point. Yeah.
And so I feel like basically, I guess the conversations that we were having was just like, ultimately, there's not one homogenous queer community either.
No.
And so there is not one homogenous way of describing queer icons because people are different and people need different things. And so we already knew that what we thought was Bruce Springsteen is a queer icon because just by virtue of if it was literally only me and Holly and Bella in the whole world who loved Bruce Springsteen, that is enough for him to be our queer icon. So we already knew that ultimately we don't really care. But then once we were in the room with those, and it's also the other funny thing is I picked that panel, right? Because I'm the producer, so I found that panel of people. It's 3 people, so I did that extra super duper to myself, where I like knew it was going to be difficult. But yeah, we felt there was so much jeopardy, and so it was really nerve-wracking actually doing that last episode. But yeah, our conclusion was like, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
We know.
I'm glad it came out the way it did.
I think that's interesting, and it would be, if we were doing a high school debate club, right? It would be interesting to hear somebody take the case he isn't, right? And because I'm sure, I remember a few years ago when The Martian came out, the novel about the guy stuck at Mars, right? And it turned and he knew agriculture. That was the scientist, and the writer goes, yeah, okay, if you call me unfair, but I'm writing the book, I know that to make this work my main character had to be an agriculture specialist. Okay, fine, excuse me. So yes, I do, we're telling a story, I'm going to pick the categories I could build. Were there categories where you go, I don't think there's a strong case, so let's not discuss them?
Yeah, I guess the best argument against Bruce Springsteen being a queer icon is just because queer people like his music doesn't make the man a queer icon. One of the members of the panel said to us at the end was like, yeah, one of the most challenging people to convince was Hugh Lemmy. He's like a writer and a podcaster. He has a podcast called Bad Gays, and he is a Springsteen fan and grew up being a closeted gay Springsteen fan. He was like, so he came on to the last episode being like, I like Bruce Springsteen, I don't think he's a queer icon. That is ultimately the most difficult kind of argument, is like, you can convince me that his lyrics can be read from a gay lens, you can convince me that, do you know what I mean? But just because he's a musician that queer people like doesn't make him an icon. And that was a hard one, and then ultimately our answer to that was like, yes, and there's all this other stuff around him too. And that's what makes him more than just a musician that queer people like.
Yeah, and go ahead, please, Bella.
I was just going to say, that is a tough thing because icon status for artists in general, it is something that, like, if you have to convince, you're losing the argument. Because if someone said Judy Garland is a gay icon, I'd be like, of course, obviously. Like, Madonna is a queer icon, of course. Although I'd say gay icon, but Madonna is a gay icon, of course. Like, it's something where when you have to convince, you're like, well, I don't really know that I would say. Maybe it should be something that is just, you say it and people are like, oh, obviously, I've never thought about it. But now that I'm putting a second of thought into it, it makes sense. So I see how that is a difficult line to walk, even though I still think Bruce is a queer icon.
Well, and I think that comes down to it, and I'm not speaking of me, I'm thinking generally, I'm queer. I think he's an icon, therefore he's a gay icon, right? Queer icon. And yeah, and there are no universals. I am sure there is somewhere someone who's queer who can't stand Judy Garland, rolls their eyes and go, why do we have to go through that cliche or whatever?
Sure.
So that's great.
Not me, of course.
That,
I
yeah.
love Judy.
Anything else for the podcast before I ask you a couple other things? Okay.
Nothing for me.
Okay. Jesse, the amount of times, I always like to preface this, the amount of times you've seen Bruce perform live is not a fair barometer of how big of a fan you are. Have you been able to see him live? And if so, do you count?
Yes, so I have only seen Bruce Springsteen live once in my life. Yeah, so much of my relationship with him was just in my bedroom on my own.
Yeah.
But I did get to see him live, and it was in May 2023, and I went to see him in Rome with one of my really good friends who is one of my like straight Springsteen fan friends.
Yeah.
And it was just incredible. I also went, I was like, if I'm going to do this for the first time, I'm going to do it properly. So we didn't get anywhere near the front, but we went there hours and hours early. We did not realize how much Italians like Bruce Springsteen. And I took all of my drag stuff. So I went dressed in my drag clothes, and then I had my makeup bag. And while we waited for 4 hours in the crowd, I put on my full Butch Springsteen face. And it was really funny because also part of drag is, so when you do, part of drag makeup is all about contouring in the same way as lots of normal makeup is about contouring the shape of your face. So what you do, the first layer that you put on is really light. It's basically almost white, and you're like highlighting different bits of your face, and then you go over with a darker layer, and it helps you to change the shape of your face. And so this really drunk guy turned around and looked at me and was like, kiss, because it looked like I was putting on like that kind of makeup. And then my friends turned around, they were like, no, wait for it. And then he turned away, chatted to his friends, and then looked back when I was in full Butch, and he was like, Bruce, and it was this like really sweet moment.
Oh my God, he'll get there.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
And it was really like, I never cry I don't cry when people die. I don't cry when I have a breakup. I don't cry. Like, I'm one of those classic, like, hard to access my emotions in actual times when you're meant to cry, but at music and films and things, I cry a lot. And so I did so much crying for the whole, it was like such a big release. And it was really interesting because I have my songs that mean a lot to me, and Out in the Street isn't really one of them. I don't relate super hard to that song. And for some reason, that was the one that really got me. I was like screaming, shouting, jumping up and down with my friends and just bawling. So I couldn't stop crying. Yeah, and I think the feeling that I was having was like one of the kind of queer feelings of out in the street, I walk the way I want to walk, is this like really, fuck you, I'm going to be the person that I want to be. And also it's when I'm out protesting in the street, whose streets are streets, and so I feel this kind of, it's a reclaiming anthem. But anyway, yeah, it was a real surprise to me, but that was the one that really hit me hard.
Love that.
And once again, I'm going back to something that we talked about early. Out in the Street is my son's favorite song, and it's because he says there's not anyone in the work world, whether you're a CEO or the lowest clerk, that on Monday morning you're not already thinking about Friday. And the line, when the foreman calls time, I've already got Friday on my mind. And so but the moment you go, I walk the way I want to walk, it does make it, it changes the song again. And it's just perfect. Like, how can a song about some blue collar dock worker that's unloading crates, talking about taking his girl out, speak to someone from the UK that's produces radio songs, right? Rap shows. But it's amazing. I love that. You mentioned already, but I want to give you a chance. Are there favorite albums or songs that mean a lot to you, Jesse?
Just too many.
Yes.
I'll just say what I'm like currently really listening to. Album wise, I think I've spent a long time with Darkness on the Edge of Town. That is one I come back to often. And then at the moment, I'm listening a lot to the song Real Man from Human Touch, I think, because I'm thinking a lot about masculinity at the moment. It's a funny thing transitioning towards masculinity. Lots of people in the queer community can say things like fuck men.
Yeah.
Men, and also commonly men can have and have caused different versions of harm to me and to some of my community. But I think I'm someone who thinks about patriarchy being bad for everyone, including men. It's really hard to be socialized as a man in this world as well. And so I'm thinking about masculinity and thinking about its like softness and what it means to be a man, or how I can define being a man that is different to maybe society's expectations of being a man and things like that. Real Man is a really fun song in terms of that, because it's one of his really soppy ones where you can beat on his chest, well, any monkey man, but you make me feel like a real man because I'm so in love with you. And that's it can be quite like transcoded as well, because it's all about recognizing people as they actually are rather than how they look necessarily.
Yeah.
So I love that one. And then in a similar way, I'm listening a lot to Tougher Than the Rest, and that's going to be the next. I'm going to do a drag act using the song Tougher Than the Rest, because I find that similar as well. It's this very, in loads of his songs and in his life, he straddles this beautiful line of being really hyper macho in some ways, so hyper macho to the point of camp, but then also really soft and really aware of masculinity and like interrogating it as a thing. And I love Tougher Than the Rest because I think that really encapsulates his kind of thinking around masculinity in that way.
Bella, any questions before I ask her the Mary question?
Before we ask the Mary question, let's see. Sorry, Jesse, you just had such an interesting thing about masculinity that now I'm on that. And there's such an interesting way that Bruce does masculinity, because when he is hyper macho, it is like a performance. No, I don't think, yeah.
I think that's something that I recognize that I love about him, is I think that he sees gender as a performance. I think he's really aware of the idea that people perform gender. And that's so compelling.
Yeah, and so interesting for a 70-year-old man from New Jersey.
Totally.
But yes, no other questions. So Jesse, go ahead and ask him the Mary question.
Yeah, I'm thinking also of that a few years ago, President Obama and Bruce sat down, and Barack said that, Michelle, you need to spend more time with him because he gets it. And I think that's nice that, someone, and he's also been very open about his therapy and his depression.
Totally.
And yeah, Jason Isbell in an interview said that the more specific I get about what's happening to me, the more universal it becomes, which I think is pretty interesting. All right, Jesse, this is amazing. Thank you so much for spending part of your Saturday afternoon with Bella, and I hope you had fun.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been so much fun.
So I end every podcast with the Mary question. So what that is, Jay Armstrong, who is now retired, but he was a high school English teacher here in the Philadelphia area in the US, but he would give his students the lyrics to Thunder Road, and they would read it as if it was a poem, talking about the imagery and the themes that Bruce explores in the song. And he would ask his class at the end of the day, do they think Mary gets in the car? So Jesse, that is your question. Do you think Mary gets in the car at the end of Thunder Road?
100% Mary gets in the car. I'm like, so for me, like,
yes.
Thunder Road is like one of those absolutely classic. It's a classic song that's been queered, in that, like, for me, Thunder Road is like a lesbian love anthem, where the person singing is like, they're both in this small town where they can't be who they want to be, and they've had some bad experiences, and she's coming to save her, and Mary gets in, and then they go to the big city, and then they have a beautiful life together.
Bella, any final thoughts?
Just Jesse, thank you so much. Both Jessies, but Jesse L to start. Thank you so much for the podcast. It really brought me so much joy, and I'm so glad I have it as a way to show people how I think about Bruce. And it was just so nice to know that other people are thinking about Bruce the same way I am. And of Jessie J, obviously, thank you for your podcast as well, but you already know how much I love your podcast.
Thank you. Jesse L, any final thoughts?
No, just thanks so much. It's been so nice to be on. Oh, actually, no, there's one which is just if I'm allowed to plug something.
Please do. Yeah, and how to reach you. I'm going to ask please tell people how to reach you and how to find the podcast and plug away.
Oh, cool. Okay, great. So the podcast, it would be so great if people would listen and tell us what they think. That is called Because the Boss Belongs to Us. And it's on wherever you listen to podcasts, you'll be able to find it. The thing I was going to plug is we had a bunch of friends who are queer musicians who did covers of different songs for the show that we released at the same time as the show. And I think people often forget, but basically, if you listen to the podcast, in the show notes for every episode, there's a link to our playlist, which is called Queer Springsteen. And it is all of the covers that were made to celebrate the show, and then also just a bunch of Springsteen songs that me and Holly think are like queer ones. So if anyone's listening and being like, ooh, do I want to, like, what are the queer songs? Just log on, go to the podcast, and then in the show notes, Queer Springsteen playlist.
So Jesse L, if you'll send me the link to that, I'll include that in the show notes. I'll include a link
sure,
to your
yeah.
website, but also include directly to how to get to the playlist. All right, we're going to end with I ain't no fighter. That's easy to see, but as a lover, I ain't going down in history. But when lights go down and you pull me close while I look in your eyes, and there's one thing I know, baby, I'll be tough enough. And if I can find the guts to give you all my love, then I'll be feeling like a real man, feeling like a real man. Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Bella. Thank you, listeners. Please go check out the podcast, check out the playlist, and give them some love. Go to wherever you listen to, give them some 5 stars, and let them know you heard about it on Set Listing Bruce. For now, be safe, be kind, and we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.